Hello. Waiting for folks to join. We're going live with Mikki Kendall today. Hi, y'all. Come on in. Come on in. So excited. All right. I'm trying to get our messages opened on my iPad because I know some folks sent in some questions. I'm going to make sure I get those. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all here. Thank you, Cody. Do I sound okay? I have this mic. Hello from my home city of Hartford. Hello, everyone. All right. Just waiting for, let me make sure. Okay. Great. Thank you all so much. I'm so excited to be here today. We're going to go live with Mikki Kendall. I'm just waiting. Oh, there she is. For her to join. Hartford in the building. And I'll just quickly introduce myself and then we're going to bring Mikki on in here. So for those of you, it's not too late to submit a question. There's actually a question box at the bottom. So if you click the question box, you can actually submit a question and then we can all see it. For those of you here, my name is Bulaong Ramiz-Hall. I'm the director of the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity at the University of Kansas. And I'm so excited to be in conversation today with Mikki Kendall. And I'm going to read Mikki's sleeve and then I'll go ahead and call her in. So Mikki Kendall is a writer, speaker, and blogger whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Guardian, Time, Salon, Ebony, Essence, and elsewhere. She has discussed race, feminism, violence in Chicago, tech, pop culture, and social media on NPR's Tell Me More, Al Jazeera's The Listening Post, and BBC's Women's Hour, as well as at universities across the country. She co-edited the Locus Award-nominated anthology Hidden Youth and is part of the Hugo Award-nominated team of editors at Fireside Magazine. A veteran, she lives in Chicago with her family, joining us today. So how do I do this? We're doing it. Okay, we go. Okay. Here's Mikki.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be doing this with you today.
I'm excited to do it. I was
Yes.
having some technology adjustments to make,
Yes.
but we got it.
You look great. You sound great.
Yay.
So for those of us, or for the folks joining us, they don't know, this is the first time you and I are meeting and getting a chance to talk. So I want to give you a little history as to how this came about. I have some amazing friends. We're from Hartford, Connecticut, and we decided to do a virtual book club reading Hood Feminism, notes from the women that a movement forgot. And this book club is mostly Black women, a Black man, and some Latinx folks in our community. And it just spoke to us and spoke to me personally. And I am the director of a women's and gender equity center. And the center has historically been very centered on white women and mainstream feminism. And I wanted to bring this book to my community. So that's how we got here. So I'm so grateful for your labor and your work, and just want to personally thank you for this.
I'm just so happy people are getting it. I was, when you do something like this, you kind of start off concerned, like, well, I'm putting it out. We're going to see how this goes.
Yep.
And it's been really, really great to hear that people are really connecting with it. So thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you. So I just want to jump right in to some questions, and then I know other people can request to ask some questions as well. So you put this work out into the world, and it holds a lot of your own personal narrative. How are you doing? How has this impacted your life as a Black woman, as a writer, at the Black women maybe around you in your circle? How is this impacting you?
So this is this weird, wacky ride, right? Like people who know me really well, which is a really small group of people because I'm one of those annoying people who was like, oh, new people, maybe, have sort of been entertained by the fact that this is getting as much attention as it is because I didn't really write it with an eye towards me getting as much attention.
Mm,
I wrote it with an eye towards these things are important. I don't really care if you like me.
mhm.
I don't really care if this motivates you to do things for the right reasons. I just want you to do the right thing,
Mm,
kind of a thing. And so it's been really interesting. It's been really peculiar because I think people had written their own backstories for me. Um, and those are some very interesting backstories that I've now heard
yeah,
that had nothing to do with my actual life, right?
yeah,
They looked at the fact that I had gone to college and I think they decided that said more than it really does about who I am as a person or about my history. Because you have this weird respectability focused thing when those letters go up behind your name,
mm,
right? And so it's been interesting to kind of have people go, oh, so like you lived in the hood and then you went to college.
mhm.
And then to have that weird thing where they think that you're exceptional, right? That you're not like the other Black
Yeah,
girls, and then have to kind of be
yeah,
like, you know what? I'm still at the Harold's on 53rd getting my chicken with mild sauce. So like,
yes,
calm down, pump your brakes, right? I
yes,
I I I will still stop at the beauty supply, and it's not Sally's. So like, re- let's
yes,
realign our expectations. And so it's been good, but it's also just been a little surreal to become, even though people knew who I was kind of from the articles and stuff, when you write a book, it's a different level of people who kind of come towards you with their expectations of what it means to be a writer and to
yeah,
be a writer who talks about this stuff. You know, and I think people still think I'm going to suddenly divorce myself from where I came from. And
mm,
that's never going to happen. My community is my community. Even if I move out of Chicago for a while, this is home. I'm always going to come back. Even if I leave the hood is home. So that's been an
yes,
interesting sort of journey to be taking here. There's a weird, separate personal narrative that I am like, oh, I never knew you wrote that script for me in your head. Huh.
yeah, yeah. That's so interesting because I think a lot of Black women specifically, those of us who are in higher education and maybe come from low income communities, um, often have these narratives written about us, or we made it out, right? You talk a little bit about that in this book,
Mm-hmm.
and should have somehow keep striving to make it out and never go back. And so I think that's something that really, really resonated with a lot of the women that I've spoken to who have read this. Yeah. I wanna dive into some of this conversation around respectability because it comes up in a lot of different chapters. I had a question from a Black woman feminist who is also a PhD student here at the University of Kansas. Her name's Shauna, and she wanted to know, as a Black feminist who has a sex positive sexual health and wellness platform that channels pleasure politics. Um, she greatly appreciated your focus on the negative impact of respectability politics. How did you decide to focus on that in support of this work?
So one of the things, I joined the Army to pay for my first degree, okay?
Mhm.
And then I went on to work for the federal government eventually. I worked in colleges. I had, that range of sort of climbing the ladder financially, Black middle class jobs. And I was at this meeting in DC at one of the agencies I used to work for. And the conversation turned to what they were going to do. This is an organization that focuses on stabilizing, it was created by Elizabeth Warren, we'll put it that way.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm at this table and they kept saying those people. And I said, those people, what do you mean those people? Well, you know, like people in the projects, people who, you know, would never be in a room like this. Those people need a hug and a check. They don't really need, and I can't remember the products we were talking about, the financial products we were talking about. But in the middle of those people, I was like, oh, they wouldn't be in this room. They wouldn't be at this table because I'm one of those people. And then listening to the things people will say about girls from the hood, and I've always heard those things. I have always heard people say certain things, and then because my body is not respectable, I'm what they politely call thick, right? My family is one of those people who, you know, the boobs show up, the butt shows up, and then you grow up, kind of a thing. And people's relationships with my body have very little to do with the words or my experiences or anything else sometimes. And then to be sitting there and realize that those people in their heads was this artificial construct completely, right? Because it wasn't even what we think of as the absolutely negative, those people shouldn't have rights. It was like, oh, those people just need, you know, a hug and blah, 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 because those people can't be here, right? And I thought, respectability over here, respectability over there, respectability kind of everywhere, right? Yeah. And without even getting to, and I know some other people who do like politics of pleasure in Black women's bodies, without even getting to pleasure, it was almost as though people had written their entire script for Black womanhood, and not just Black women, but for well-endowed girls, for girls with big butts, for without ever bothering to talk to anyone, right? And when I was working on, one of the other things that was happening was that I don't know if you remember that newscaster where they said all of her dresses were inappropriate.
Yes.
And that girl was covered from her neck to her knees, sometimes longer. And there was a kindergarten teacher with the same thing. And I thought, we've now decided that walking around in the body you inherited, the hair you inherited, this is all a commentary on your respectability or access to respectability without you ever doing anything. So this is a complete hoax. Everything about respectability, which is one of the reasons I think I got, so I know there's a chapter where I say respectability politics like 287 times.
Yeah.
But I say it all those times because quite literally, I was like, so this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, this is a lie, right? We talk about race as a social construct. Well, the construct of respectability is used to build the smallest boxes, and then it's like the boxes just keep getting smaller. And it doesn't matter how you dress, how you wear your hair. I had a coworker at a subsequent federal agency come to talk to me about my afro once. This was before I locked my hair again. And what message it was conveying. And I was like, the message it's conveying is that this is the way my hair grows out of my head. And if you're going to keep talking, oh, buddy, we're about to have a lovely conversation with HR, because I actually know the federal regs on hair, because I've been walking around in this skin with this hair this whole time.
Yeah.
And so I really sort of focused in on that, because I don't think we can win, right? Respectability doesn't work. You know, when people say, well, if they weren't wearing hoodies, they wouldn't be getting beat up. And then you can open to the entire civil rights movements and dogs and hoses and people in suits and Sunday dresses, right? Yeah. When it's, well, if she dressed different. Well, you know, I got to tell you, as a double D, they don't really make clothes that hide these. Yeah. They definitely don't make clothes that hide that. So, like, I don't know what you have to do, right? If my hair is wrong, my skin color is wrong, my build is wrong, well, then you're telling me not to exist. You're telling all of us just the real road to safety is to not exist. Well, that's not safety. That's death. And I'm not going to die to make you feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so profound. And I think we're in the middle of Sexual Assault Awareness Month on college campuses, and now virtually trying to figure out how to have some of these conversations around prevention. And it always dives into this other realm around, well, if you dress this way, if you don't go out, if you don't drink this, and it feels like we have the same conversations over and over and over and over again. Um, and,
And
you
we
know,
never have the conversation, don't be a rapist. The
no,
conversation is
yes,
always what you, person who is at risk, do to stop the predator. But whose fault rape is? Rapists.
yes,
That's
yes,
that's who's
yeah.
responsible. That's who's at fault.
Yeah, I was so uh, fascinated and in pain and affirmed by the Fast-Tailed Girls in Freedom chapter. And as I was reading it, I was thinking about the systems that we have in place, specifically in educational institutions, that mirror systems in our city and our state. So reporting systems, adjudication processes, especially around sexual violence, and thinking about what would it look like if colleges and universities were possibility models for creating new ways of thinking about systems, of thinking about restorative justice. What would you imagine that could look like?
I mean, I would, in my head, we would spend so much less time on college campuses teaching how not to drink, how not to be out, to go in pairs, and all of this. And I would actually roll it back even before college, right? As part of sex ed, not being a rapist.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? I don't know how many people remember during, I want to say it was Steubenville, but there was a boy during one of those major cases, and I think it was Steubenville, Ohio, who said, I didn't know it was rape.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself back then, and it comes back to me a lot, that if we're going to talk about safety and sexual assault and all of these things, then we have to unteach the norms that make sexual assault possible, right? And those norms aren't just the guy in the bushes with a knife, or that her skirt is too short, or she was drinking and she passed out on someone's bed, or whatever. Those norms are the idea that you have a right to someone else's body if they don't protect it enough. And by enough, apparently what we mean is, I think, a giant plastic bubble surrounded by steel. I've never actually figured out what enough is, because we know, actually, that even on campuses, when we talk about date rape, oftentimes it wasn't a date. It's a girl with a guy she thinks she can trust. It's a guy with a guy, right? Because it's not just heterosexual assault that happens.
Yeah.
And it's a girl with a girl she thinks she can trust. It's all of these things, because what we've failed to do is teach over and over. And I know that the question is about college, but I think it has to start in high school, looking at the stats from high school and from junior high. And I think college should really reinforce this before people go out in the world, that you don't have the right to anyone else's body. You don't have a right to touch them. You don't have a right to violate them. You don't have a right because you like them, because you desire them, or whatever else. You want to control them. You want to punish them. Like, the list of reasons for assault is longer than this call has time for. But we would literally have to start concretely making campus safety conversations around not being an assaulter, not being an abuser. And I would love to see that little special thing we do at the beginning of freshman year, where we all have that little conversation. Everybody's freshman year, you get together, you have an awkward conversation about not getting raped. How about we make that conversation about not being a rapist, not being an abuser? How about we talk about what those things are? Because we know by the time people get to college, they have a wealth of experiences. And I don't know what's happened in an individual assailant's home, but I do know it was probably unhealthy, and it probably taught them horrible things. So I would love to normalize therapy. I would love to normalize the idea that everyone has a right to safety, that everyone has a right to be comfortable wherever they are, right? That you should be able to fall asleep on your friend's couch or your friend's bed, that it should be safe for you to drink and experience being 20, 21, 22, whatever. That there is never an excuse, as opposed to now where we have a list of ways to blame victims.
Yeah. I'm so, I was so interested in the language you wrote around rape culture is pandemic, while we're in the middle of a pandemic. Because it made me think, I was just like, oh, that's such like poignant language. And I wonder what our world, our country would look like if we responded to rape as a pandemic in the way that we're responding to COVID-19, right? Like,
Well, the
would
way
we
that other places that are not the U.S. are responding.
exactly? Yes, exactly. But even the number of, politicians you see talking
Mhm.
about it, whether or not they're effective, but at least talking about it, articles about it, people are home making face masks. And so it really had me thinking and imagining about what response would be like if people were actually treating rape and rape culture as a pandemic.
I think a really good example of sort of starting to do that kind of thing is showing up in public service announcements. I do this weird thing where I watch a lot of dramas, foreign dramas, and Facebook has figured that out. So Facebook serves me all manner of things because they can't figure out who or what I am. But I've noticed that India in particular has begun to run a significant number of public service announcements that are anti-rape, patriarchal cultural norms, things like that. I'm seeing some of it come out of South Africa and out of Australia, and it does make me think that I've never seen commercials like that just run, right? You see a very special thing in this particular month or this particular week, or a special ad on a college campus. But what would it look like if we were constantly using this giant media machine that is Hollywood, to run PSAs like that, to run fundraising for, domestic violence orgs, all of these things? What would it look like if we were building better safety nets? Because that would be a way to address the pandemic. One of the unfortunate things right now is that, yes, we have to flatten this curve, but there's another curve forming. Yeah. And it's going up and up and up. And it's violence and sexual assault stats inside these homes that are on lockdown. People are in places that are not safe to be in quarantine. And I think that we're going to have to start to look at how our society is constructed. If we want everyone to stay in and we want people not to go places, we have to make it safe for you to stay in, not just financially, but socially, right? Because there's a lot of people in roommates, shared housing, whatever situations who thought they were safe and are finding out now because of the stressors that they're not safe. A friend shared with me, because she wanted some advice, that she was on a call with someone from work and the person happened to pivot their screen slightly and she could see that behind this woman's head, someone had punched more than one hole through the wall. And she was trying to figure out, what do I do? Because I know I wasn't supposed to see that, but I did see it, and I do know what that looks like. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not what it looks like, but the placement and the positioning makes me think that there's something amiss. And we were talking about, what resources are accessible, that kind of thing. But I thought to myself, she may not have known, right? We like to also blame victims of domestic violence for not knowing in advance. She may not have known before the pandemic that she was locked in with an abuser, because nothing was the trigger yet. So we have to create that social system. We have to respond to violence as though it is a crisis, because it is a crisis.
Yeah, that's such an amazing point, and one that even, I've heard so much about people concerned, having conversations about what resources do we give folks who may be locked in homes with abusive parents or partners, and not thinking that maybe they don't know yet. Maybe this is the first experience that they're having, because there hasn't been a trigger. So that's such an amazing point. I'm curious if you could. Oh, go ahead.
I was saying, especially because when it comes to abusive relationships, I know this from experience, the things that you see as red flags retroactively are actually pretty normal in the moment if you consume enough rom-coms, right? Like your partner's a little jealous, your partner really wants to make sure you eat right, things like that. When you're not yet in a position where they've been violent, where they've been yelling, where they're wherever, those aren't red flags. And we tend to think of it as though it goes from 0 to 60, and it's actually more like 0 to 0.5, right? It's the frog in boiling water thing. And so I think that that's something else we're going to have to change our messaging around. You shouldn't leave when they hit you. You should leave when they're mean to you.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that. That's so beautiful. I want to connect, but also shift a little bit, because I think oftentimes we have conversations about feminism, um, and they often are taken over by the mainstream feminism, you know, conversation issues. And I'm really interested in what Black folks, like what we need to be talking about with each other, and curious if you could share a little bit about where you see some of our um, healing that needs to be done, some reckoning with our pain and trauma in order to move to a place where we can address some of the basic needs and
I mean,
larger meta feminism work.
I think a lot of it. I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan of therapy, and I think it should be one of those things, kind of like how we have those dental checks in preschool and grammar school and whatever. I think access to a therapist, a trauma-based therapist in particular for Black people, but overwhelmingly for basically everyone, is one of those things we would have to start to normalize. And the people say go to church and all of those things. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's where you find comfort and your pastor is a trained counselor, great. But your pastor may not be trained for the thing that impacts you. You may need to shop around for better help, all of these things. But I wish we could normalize the idea that mental health is a physical, right? A mental health physical is as important as that annual exam at the OBGYN or that annual exam with a cardiologist or whatever. Because right now, we're in this weird sort of catch as catch can phase where some people are coming from cultures and communities where therapy is not necessarily put down. And some folks have been taught all their lives that it's not for anyone, that you just go to church with your problems. And sometimes church is your problem. So, and what is happening in your church or with religion is part of what has gone wrong. And so I think in order to find that healing, we all kind of have to do a little self-work. We all would have to be willing to say, you know, I'm probably not great. I've probably behaved poorly. I've probably replicated things that were done to me or things that are traumatic for my partner or people around me. And we have to kind of give up on the idea that forgiveness means staying in these interactions. Sometimes some relationships are toxic, they have to end. But the biggest thing is to be able to be healthy within yourself, right? And I am a huge fan of the idea that if you feel like I am screwing everything up, my life is never on track, so forth, so on, you need to be looking at what you can do to take care of you. If that means you take a break from romance, from career pursuing, from your parents, whatever, you should be able, we should normalize the idea that you get to go and do the work on yourself so that you can be the best you, right? Because if you are unhappy, unhealthy, unwhole in some way, harmed in some way, you can't do good. You can't do right by anyone else because you're not doing right by yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of interpersonal conflicts and intercultural conflicts that you'll see, especially between Black men and Black women and non-binary and trans folks, boils down to traumas that actually mostly have nothing to do with the person that's in front of you and have a lot to do with stuff that you have buried, you have suppressed, that had gone on, that you've never addressed in some meaningful ways. And I know that people will say, well, I tried therapy and it didn't work, or I tried meds and it didn't work. And the answer is often that you had the wrong therapy or the wrong meds. Not that you didn't need help, not that these things can't work, but that what you had, it's, you know, it's like having chicken pox and getting treatment for the measles. It's not going to work. You can't get an MMR vaccine and defeat chicken pox. So what you need is a chicken pox vaccine. So you need to go seek the care that you actually need. And we should make it so that it's easier to access culturally competent and sensitive, racially sensitive care. I know there are not enough Black therapists, but we're also not training white therapists to be culturally competent, unfortunately. And that requires kind of some changes at the academic level, but also just wholesale across the board in how we as a culture engage with ourselves individually.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. I have one more question I want to ask, and then I want to turn to some of the questions we got submitted. You talked a little bit about intercultural conflict, and I'm wondering, and I'll try to combine two questions into one, if you could talk a little bit about the challenges that you see women of color, and I mean Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, Pacific Islander folks, what kind of challenges or what things do we need to overcome in order to truly coalition build in our like collective community?
So racism is the big overarching umbrella here, right? But anti-Blackness is a hell of a drug. Propaganda is a hell of a drug. White supremacy is a hell of a drug, right? And white supremacy doesn't function just to impact how white people perceive each other. It drips down and poisons all of our cultures and how we perceive each other, right? And it's so overwhelming that we will say a city like Chicago is hyper-segregated. Chicago's actually not hyper-segregated. White people in Chicago are segregated from everybody else. But the South and West Side that you keep hearing about being neglected, the reason they're neglected is because that's where all the brown and Black people are living, right? And there's a little bit on the North Side, but there's like almost a barrier line in which we've now decided that the presence of whiteness is required for diversity. Well, if we were going to talk to each other without that lens that whiteness and white supremacy creates, we would have to talk about anti-Blackness and why you believe that Black people are a problem, why you believe that immigrants are stealing your jobs, why you believe that, those people steal or those people eat whatever, right? Like with the chump that is currently sitting in the White House, and the things he says about the coronavirus. All of these things, all of this messaging is the same propaganda we were fed in World War I and World War II, and it's the same propaganda that's always handed down to create divisions between communities. Does that mean that there is not fraught actual history between those communities? No, obviously anybody can do bad things to anybody else, but that conversation has to happen, and it has to be honest, and it has to be as much of a reckoning about what happens when I walk into a beauty supply in some neighborhoods and the person behind the counter is a different color than me and starts checking for my bag because they think I'm going to steal. And also what happens when, you decide to make slants in your eyes or say African booty scratcher or any one of a dozen other misconducts that we are all subject to because we pick it up from what white supremacy has fed us. We think that other didn't do anything, didn't try, because Jim Crow era media shows us this monocolored world that has nothing to do with reality, right? And so we have to talk about what it meant to be civilized, one of the 5 civilized, because your tribe owned slaves, and your nation owned slaves and that kind of thing, but also what it means now to still be upset with this group, but not with that group, and what we can do together, because the conditions on a reservation, the conditions in the inner city, the conditions for poor rural white people, we're all basically facing the same terrible fraught conditions, right?
Yeah.
I had the virus, and I can say with some accuracy that although money would not completely insulate you, being financially stable enough to be sick and be home and be cared for is currently a privilege in America. It is a privilege in a lot of places. And we're all going to be subject to what they've been calling the great equalizer, but it's not really an equalizer, right? We're seeing some communities get hit harder because some communities have all been deprived of the same kinds of resources. So instead of getting mad at other people for scrambling for the same crumbs, we could come together to take the cake, because that guy's got the cake.
Yeah.
Why am I fighting with you over this much and he's got a wedge this big? That's kind of what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to, yes, have those fraught conversations. Yes, be uncomfortable. Yes, be angry, cry, all of that. But also look at each other and say, okay, now that we've settled that, right? It's like fighting with your cousins, right? At whatever family party, right? You and your cousin will knuckle up in the back room. But if you're at school and some girl tries to jump your cousin, at least where I come from, you're jumping in because you can fight your cousin, but she can't. It's got to be that same logic. It's got to be that same, you're all connected, and it's not always comfortable and it's not always easy. And you got to be willing to hear you're wrong, right? So I think that we could do it. I've seen a lot of examples of it throughout history. The problem is that we kind of get sidetracked by the idea that the goal is a seat at the table, that one seat, when the real answer is that we just need a new table, need a bigger table.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm thinking now back to your book, and you write about America loves this idea of meritocracy, and it's just not real, right? That is not
At
real.
all.
And we really have to do the work of unlearning those narratives that we've been fed. I'm going to run to some of these questions that we have. So, thanks so much for this discussion. Boo, as I read the book, I notice, how do I see the whole question? Oh, hold on. I notice a change of tone from chapter to chapter. Does anyone in these comments know how you see the whole question? I'm
I
not
don't.
sure.
Can you
I'll come,
scroll? I've never.
I'll come back to that, and then we'll
Okay.
try to see. What were your thoughts about my alma mater, Spelman College's anti-rape campaign, which addressed cultural betrayal? So I'm assuming that meant relationships between Black men and Black women specifically.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, but no. I think that it's an important thing to talk about, but I think that misogyny and the hatred of women in general, because that's why I always tie sexual assault to. There's hate in there. There's power, but there's also hate. There's also rage and hurt and all these other things. I think that we've got to address the root where we teach that some women are disposable, that some bodies are disposable. Not that you shouldn't talk about what it means inside the community, but in general, in any community, most crime is intra-racial. It's happening within that racial group. And we are not dealing with the roots of the problem that make violence seem like a solution to someone or a panacea, right? Because we know that whether the assault happens across racial lines or interracially, that we are not looking at someone who sees the person they're assaulting as a human, as an equal, right? And it doesn't seem to matter so much about their race as it does about their, their gender and whatever else is going on in that person's head. And so I think it's really important sometimes when we do these kinds of campaigns, not to say, well, you owe me safety because we're the same race. No, you owe me safety because I'm human. And that's not to say that we shouldn't also talk about that. But I don't like any campaign that could be twisted to say that you can't assault me, but you can assault someone else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It has me thinking about how do we specifically, I was like you, raised by my Black grandmother, and thinking a lot about how our racial allegiance has not allowed us to be honest about the trauma and the pain and the violence that many Black women specifically have experienced in our communities. And from sexual violence to parental violence, being beaten, and right. And so really thinking about how do we have those conversations intergenerationally in Black communities so that we can enter into some healing space, enter in some truth telling space, without the potential of re-traumatizing our elders, and so I've been really thinking about that.
And that's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of the concept of therapy, because a trauma therapist might need to be a person that comes to your family therapy sessions.
Mm-hmm.
It might need to be someone experienced with trauma. And I know that that is a very narrow pool, don't get me wrong. But might need to be someone that enters into grandma's healing, grandpa's healing, whatever. Because for a lot of people, especially in our communities of color in general, but especially Black American communities, there seems to have been a decision sort of collectively that we had to just tuck that in and keep on trucking. And then it spills over, right? It's like carrying around this vial of toxic waste. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then one day, as happens with, oil pipelines and everything else, an accident happens, or more than one accident happens. And I think people can't even construct intergenerationally what it would be like to feel good and comfortable in their skin all the time. Because if they ever experienced it, it was so long ago, because they still have to have, even if there was no trauma in the house, Jim Crow is a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Crow is a decade-long, ongoing trauma. The war on drugs is a trauma. You know, racism is an ongoing trauma. And we have sort of divorced racism from all other forms of trauma in a weird white supremacist-centered kind of a narrative where we talk about rape and we talk about, you know, gun violence and that kind of thing. But even if we talk about bullying, we don't really talk about the impact racist bullying will have explicitly. We don't talk about unconscious bias, right? We don't talk about the fact that we've normalized some version of the idea that racism only counts if a cross is on fire, to the point where, like, there's currently a TikTok meme making jokes about the 3/5 compromise, right? And these kids have their whole faces, the whole thing, and people are posting them and they're laughing about it. And I'm thinking to myself, well, racism can't die out if it's a joke. Yeah. We can't get past this. And then we look at our elders and we say, why aren't you able to deal with me better? And it's true, we would love to break the cycle, but I'm just not sure for a lot of our elders they ever got the support they needed. In a weird way, we're one of the first couple, Gen X and so on, the first couple generations where we could actually look at each other and say, hey, I need some help emotionally. My emotional health matters as much as everything else. And I'm not sure, even though I think that it's important, I'm not sure how many of the elders I know in my family and in general that I've spoken to ever felt like they had the option of seeking that kind of help, ever had the option of feeling like they could be emotionally in a better place.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's profound and really thinking about how we can partake in the healing of our community as a whole, you know. I want to go back to these questions. Okay, so what do you know about yourself now that you didn't know before starting this book?
Oddly enough, one of the things that I actually feel like I know about myself now is that and this is going to sound so twee, but it really doesn't matter outside of this space, outside of my home and whatever, my family, what people feel about me, because it doesn't, I have no control over the narratives, over everything else. And a lot of things that we think are super important about what other people think of us really aren't. You know, when this all first started, when I had the hashtag and everything, people kept telling me I would never have a career and I was ruining my future, and I can't remember all the things. And on the one hand, spite is a significant part of my personality, and I did this in part because spite, let me not lie to you. But on the other hand, I realized that having something to say requires no one else's permission, right? It requires no one else's approval. A lot of times, I think we, especially as women of color, get hung up on the idea that we have to be perfect. We have to work twice as hard to get half as far and all of these things. And yes, racism means we'll have to work harder, but also we sort of internalize this idea that we need to be perfect to get anything done. And that's ultimately self-harming. We think we have to be stronger and all of these things. And it's been really interesting to be up, down, left, right, happy, sad, whatever. And the narratives outside keep going on. My work keeps going on. And people approve or don't approve, understand, don't understand, because once you birth the book and put it out, you're done with it, right? People can send you notes, things they think you should improve, whatever, but the book is done. Your project is over, and now you move on to the next thing. And that's not to say that there aren't places where it could have been better or whatever. I'm sure someone's got, you know, ideas. So much as it is that in doing this and going through this process, I sort of taught myself, I gave myself permission to fail and get up again. And I always felt like I had to do things right the first time, right? You do that first pass. Well, one thing about writing a book is that you're going to edit it about 7 times, maybe 8. And then you start to realize that everyone's project, books, art, whatever that you think of as so amazing that you could never reach, you're looking at their final product and you're comparing your rough draft to their final product. And that's just life. You can't compare the first thing you want to do with the final project that someone else did, or even your own final project, because it's a process. That journey is super important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Someone asked a question around what was your process in writing this book, and there was another question that was asking if you intentionally did the chapters following Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because they had heard you speak to Trevor Noah. So could you speak about that a little bit?
It was a little bit, so my process was a little bit throw everything against the wall because I am a Scorpio with ADD and insomnia. So there were rough draft ideas of chapters that some of which didn't make it to the final book. And rough draft here is like sometimes 3 sentences where I try to figure out what I want to say. But overwhelmingly, it was a process of which things are most important to most people, right? So housing, your children, your safety, these kinds of things were my focus, in part because I see them as the biggest issues, but also because they're the issues that are least likely to be addressed by mainstream feminism, right? So that's why there's nothing about last names or lipsticks or heels or being a girl boss or whatever, so much as it is about just the basic kit for survival. Because ultimately, even though this book will be read by lots of people, I wrote this book in my head for people like me who had to worry about those things and figure out how to navigate this system. And sometimes you get it right and sometimes you fall down, but you just keep getting up and trying again. Because until we're meeting everyone's basic needs, it really doesn't matter if one of us is a CEO or 12 of us are a CEO, right? Right now, being a CEO of whatever, your company might be there tomorrow, it might not. Your life might be there tomorrow, it might not. But what did you do with that life? What have you been doing? And for me, I would rather know that I had done as much as I could to talk about the major issues than to be as focused on whether or not you taking your husband's last name or not taking your husband's last name was important. That's a personal choice. I don't really care. I care that you have a safe house and that he's not punching holes in the wall. These are things I care about.
Yes, absolutely. As you look back now, thinking about what was not included in the book, or something that's really present for you right now that you'd like to go back and maybe write about or speak about, is there a topic that is sitting with you presently?
Actually, the topic, weirdly enough, that's currently sitting with me is that I didn't talk enough about generationals and differences. When that whole okay boomer meme first started, I make jokes about the idea of saying okay boomer to my aunts, who I'm pretty sure would knock me into next year. Just 99.9% certain that there's just no way I can be that level of disrespectful. Not that I would want to be, but But I also thought about the fact that we really don't talk about what our elders went through, right? We talk about it a little bit in slavery, but for the women who lived through Jim Crow, other than a couple of people, we don't talk about their day-to-day lives. We're not really talking about what was going on domestically. There's a couple of books here, a couple of books there, but we're not talking about what it meant to be women from these different backgrounds who lived through these major historical events and were almost rendered invisible. Yeah. And then to come forward to now and see our generation reaping the rewards of their work that they may or may not have reaped any rewards from, because right now, for a lot of older women in particular, I know a concern is now, especially the ones who are on the verge of retirement, what am I going to do? Right? And on the one hand, we're all in this financially, not maybe in the best of places. On the other hand, there's a huge difference if you were a white boomer, let's say, woman, and a Black or Latina, right? That wealth gap is so wide. And what is it like to live through seeing it kind of close, but not really, and then see your daughters and granddaughters' generations still having to push that rock up the hill, right? And so I now wish I'd done a little more there, but then again, that might be a completely different book.
That sounds like a whole book. For sure. Yeah, I have, so we have a couple more minutes and there's 2 more questions that I think we might end with. So this is a question in the author's own words. What is hood feminism? Tell me like I'm your cousins in them.
So if I were talking to my cousin, I would say hood feminism is making sure that there's food on the table, the lights are going to stay on, and you have somewhere safe to sleep that night. And so does your sister, your friend, your cousin, your whoever it is that you care about. Yeah. And that doesn't just extend to your immediate family, your immediate circle. It is really looking around and saying, how many of us are safe? How many of us can be safer? How many of us can be in a more stable situation? What can I do? What can we do collectively to make it better? Because for me, when I was living in the projects, one of the things that was always great, but also is a little weird now to see, is the mutual aid societies that people are starting to form in the wake of the virus. That is the projects. That is your social circle, because especially when they started to stagger when you get your food stamps and things like that, there were a lot of people bridging that week for each other in this rotation, because food stamps in general only the last 3 weeks of a month. So there are a lot of people that last week, whatever your last week was, there was always somebody to help you out. And so hood feminism is making sure that we take care of each other. Even if nobody else is going to take care of us, we have to take care of each other. We have to take care of ourselves, and we have to take care of each other. Because if I'm eating and you're starving, that's not something I want to live with. That's not something any of us should be okay with.
Yeah, that's such a great description of the family I grew up in. And I don't know if any woman in my family ever vocally identified as a feminist because of what mainstream feminism looks like, right? And so I think this book and this framework offers a way of us to think of and claim feminism for ourselves as Black women, Latinx women, women of color in general, especially women from the hood, women living, below the poverty line, and taking care of ourselves and our people. So yeah, I want to end with one last question. So for you, what does joy look like in both in hood feminism and then maybe just for you in your life in general?
Joy in hood feminism would look like a complete reshaping of what we think of as basic, of a universal basic income, of universal basic housing. I'm not saying that we should all have to have mansions and $80,000 cars. Joy for me would look like us not seeing anyone be homeless without health care, and going hungry or in an unsafe situation, right? I would want everyone to have a robust social safety net, because that was key to me leaving my bad situation. I want the system that helped me leave not only to exist, but to be even bigger and better. So that is the hood feminist answer to that question, because I really, as twee as this might sound, I really hate the idea that right now and in general, we have undermined the very things that would have made getting through a pandemic easier, and may still go forth from this not having learned lessons. And then in my personal life, joy looks like my family, flowers. I have a giant vase of tulips, and I'm going to twist this slightly so you can see my giant vase of tulips. See?
Oh my gosh, those are beautiful.
Yes. Also, I'm a nerd, so I have pops and books everywhere. Just, judge me as you like. But joy right now in particular really looks like everyone that I love being okay. And if I don't get anything but more than that, I am absolutely fine.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think that's joy for a lot of us right now at this particular moment in time. And hopefully beyond this time as well.
Yes, hopefully beyond this time.
Hoping that people are okay and have their basic needs met, and can live and thrive in whatever way that means for them. Yeah. Mikki, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Being a part of this, for agreeing to it, for this book and all of your work and your voice in general. It is, it's an honor to be able to talk to you. I'm like sharing this book with everybody that I know. And I hope other folks will too. Just so folks who are watching, if you submitted a question either via email or DM, you will enter to win a copy of Mikki's book. We have purchased a copy from the Raven, which is our local bookstore here in Lawrence, Kansas, and we will ship it to you wherever you might be practicing your social distancing. So be on the lookout for a notification for that. Mikki, thank you again.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, stay
You
safe,
stay
stay
safe.
well.
Maybe I'll get to do a real in-person visit someday in the future.
I would love that. That would be great. Yes,
Yeah.
we'll be in touch. We'd love to have you
Yeah.
here at KU.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right. It was nice
Brooklyn.
to read everyone's comments.
Yes.
Bye.
All right. Bye. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Have a good
Bye.
one. Bye.
Thank y'all so much for joining us. This was the end of our Hood Feminism Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot live e-read and interview with author Mikki Kendall. If you can, find your local bookstore, see if they're delivering, order your copy, read it, share your thoughts with us. And hopefully, maybe the fall or spring, we can bring Mikki Kendall to the University of Kansas. Thank y'all for joining and stay safe. Bye.